Okay, to the Bible. Last week we wrapped up our overview of the Gospel of Mark. Today we begin another impossible task with an overview of the Gospel of Matthew in probably even less time. Not that it will be only today, but less time than what we spent on the Gospel of Mark. And Matthew is a longer Gospel. Mark has 16 chapters. Matthew has 28. And by the way, you might be interested to know that the first lesson in confirmation class, the year that we study the Bible, as opposed to the year that we study Martin Luther and the Apostle Paul, our confirmation students memorize an outline of the Gospel of Matthew. I won't put Sig on the because I'm confident she could rattle it off, but you know, we think it's important that the kids get a sense for the flow of at least one of the Gospels. So let me ask first, how did the Gospel of Mark begin? How did the Gospel of Mark begin? Maybe you remember that Mark writes the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Okay? That's how the Gospel of Mark begins. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Let's turn to Matthew 1:1. How does the Gospel of Matthew begin? Does it begin in the same way? Who will read Matthew 1:1 for us?
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
All right, so are we reading the same story or a different story? Mark, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Matthew, read again, Myrna.
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Mark doesn't say anything about a genealogy. We talked about the fact Mark doesn't say anything about a birth. It just jumps right in with the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Now Matthew starts with a family tree. And who's in the family tree, Myrna? One more time.
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
The son of David and the son of Abraham. What's the significance that Jesus is the son of David?
Royal lineage.
Royal lineage. He's in the king's family tree, right? David is the greatest of the Jewish kings. All right? Even though he's got as many flaws as any candidate running for office today, he is the greatest, right? This is an adulterer, right, who sees a woman taking a bath and sends his men to bring her to him. All right? He'd have made the news, right? He's the greatest of the Jewish kings. And that Jesus is the son of Abraham, what does that mean?
The promise was fulfilled.
The promise, so he's in that line of promise that he would, Abraham, remember, is the father of a great nation, right? Go to the land that I will show you. So there's the promised land. And what's the third aspect, the one most readily forgotten? Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. We heard an excellent sermon this morning, I thought. And wasn't that what really the sermon was about? Belonging. Okay? Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. What else is of significance that Jesus is a son of Abraham? This would get you $1 if you were in confirmation class.
He's almost, David is royalty, Abraham is the founder of it.
All right, that goes with the promise. But Jesus is the son of Abraham. What's the significance?
Son of God. No, not that religious.
Son of Abraham.
Who's the son of Abraham? Isaac. What's significant about Isaac? See?
He wasn't supposed to, like, he's supposed to be sacrificed.
Ooh, can't hear.
Say it again louder so that Dottie can hear.
He's supposed to be sacrificed.
His father takes him at a young age to Mount Moriah.
To sacrifice, okay, yeah.
Well, Father, I see your knife and I see you have fire. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And he piles up a bunch of rock and he ties his son up so he can't run away. And he dangles the boy's head over the edge of the rock, because that's how you make a sacrifice, so that you can slit his throat and drain the blood onto the ground. And there is a lamb caught in a thicket, or a ram caught in a thicket. So if Jesus is the son of Abraham, is there already in the very first verse of the gospel the hint of the sacrifice? Well, we got more reading to do, but that he is the son of David, royal, and son of Abraham, the son of the promise, and we know that there was a sacrifice involved with Abraham and his son. So, does that tell us something right away about Jesus? All right? If we were to look at Luke, there is also a genealogy in Luke. Guess what? They don't match. The genealogy in Matthew and the genealogy in Luke are not the same. One of the reasons is that Matthew is concerned with what it means that Jesus is the son of Abraham and the son of David. He's also concerned that Jesus be connected with the exile in Babylon. Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels. And so, Abraham, David, exile, those are three key themes in Jewish history, right? And to see how Jesus is connected with those is very important for Matthew, because he's the most Jewish. Michelle asked me this morning, she's teaching whatever Sunday school class, and they're studying the disciples this morning. Is Matthew, who wrote the gospel, the same Matthew, the tax collector? We don't know, but we assume, you know, I mean, there's not a picture on the back of the cover. You know, oh yeah, I knew him, you know. But we assume, and so all of those disciples were Jewish, right? So Matthew is the most Jewish. Luke, on the other hand, is least concerned to be Jewish. And Luke's concern when he writes his gospel is to include the whole world. Well, maybe that makes sense, because one of the things that confirmation students also learn when we study about the Apostle Paul is that he had 4 traveling companions on his missionary journeys, and Luke was one. Was Luke one of the original 12 disciples? He was not. But he accompanied Paul on some of his missionary journeys. And so Luke, when it comes time for him to write down what God has inspired him to tell, is concerned to connect Jesus not only with Judaism, but with the whole human family, beginning with Adam. And if he's going to be connected to Adam, then he has to also be connected with Noah, and then with Abraham and David. All right? So, the genealogies are not the same, because each of those authors is writing to different people. Or for, you know, the sermon preached here on a Sunday morning would not necessarily be the same sermon preached at Hmong Central Lutheran Church, because they got a different background. And they might be dealing with some of the same issues we deal with, but they might be dealing with different issues as well. All right? So, it's that kind of thing. So, William Xiong's sermon might have been different this morning than Amy's, because maybe the Hmong know what it is to be on the outside looking in a way that maybe we don't. Okay? So, does that make sense? Some people, if in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod we put this slide on the board, I would be fired and you would be under suspicion for sitting in this class. Because to acknowledge that there are differences between Matthew and Luke is considered heresy, false teaching. Even though it's right off the printed page. Okay? We're looking at what does it really say? And why is it a bit different? Well, Matthew's writing for people that have been in this country for decades. Luke is writing for people that just got off the boat. Or maybe grandma still doesn't speak English. You know what I mean? It's that kind of situation. Thoughts, comments, any insights about that? All right, let's take a look at Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. If somebody would read those verses for us, please. Matthew 1, 18 to 25.
Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child of the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered it, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had borne a son, and he called his name Jesus.
All right, so Joseph was a righteous man. I grew up thinking that righteous meant ethically pure. I don't know why I grew up thinking that, but I can tell you I did, right? And that's not what it means. In the scripture, righteous means faithful. So here's this guy who's engaged to this woman. Michelle and I watched the movie Brooklyn again last night. Have you seen the movie Brooklyn? Oh my gosh, you ought to rent it. Fantastic movie. It's a movie about a young Irish woman who comes to this country all alone. And she gets off the boat and she goes, her priest helps her find room in a boarding house. And I won't spoil the story, it's a wonderful story. And among other things, it's about righteousness or faithfulness. Brooklyn. It's a great, great movie. I just said to Michelle this morning, I could watch that movie 6 more times and not get tired of it. And in some ways, it's a chick flick. But, I mean, it's good. It's better than the Hallmark. You know, it's got a little more to it than, or not as predictable, okay? But, I mean, so Joseph is a righteous man, a faithful man, who's torn because Mary, to whom he's engaged, comes to him and says, I'm pregnant. And he knows it's not his baby. So he's torn because the law says that she should be stoned for adultery. And yet he loves Mary and so resolves to divorce her quietly so that she's not put to death, but so that he's not stuck with a woman he can't trust and a child not his own. All right, this is how the gospel starts. Okay?
Is there any, there are no clues written about Joseph's ancestry, but because he's faithful, does that mean he is
No,
Jewish?
in fact, I would say that we do know something about Joseph. Look at verse 20.
Okay.
As he considered this, that is, to break off the engagement, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph,
Okay,
son of David. All right, so he's somewhere in David's family tree, which
yeah,
centuries after David is huge.
Yeah.
All right, so he's not by far the most famous one in David's
Right.
tree, but, you know, I mean, I'm related to the King of England.
yeah.
You know, not that it does me, I mean, I'm not, but you know what I mean? Not that it does me any good.
So we know he knew the Jewish law, or?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah. Although he lives in Galilee, not in Jerusalem, so he's not part of the temple crowd.
Right.
In fact, he's sort of suspect, because he lives outside of Judea, or Judah, and he lives in the northern county of Galilee, right? I mean, that's worse than being outstate Minnesota, okay? I mean, it's,
Not quite a black mark, but it's.
well, I was gonna say, but then I bit my tongue.
Oh.
It would be like the way we look at people from
From
Iowa.
Iowa, I knew that was coming. Oh, gee.
I mean, you just,
And it
you know.
wasn't Myrna that said it
Right,
either,
right.
come on. Sorry,
But, you know, it's, or when I was growing up, you know, it's, I mean, I didn't even know what a Polak was, but I knew that they were a different class than, you know, than the Preuss.
Okay.
So Joseph is a son of David, and he's told that the child is of the Holy Spirit. Now, what does that mean? He doesn't know. It's still not his, right? But, in one way or another, the angel tells him, Mary has not been unfaithful. Do not fear to take Mary your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son. You shall call his name Jesus. And what does Jesus mean?
Oh, Emmanuel.
Nope,
Oh,
God with us.
nope.
Oh.
Jesus
Close.
means God saves.
God save. Okay.
Jesus meaning Savior. Okay, so his name tells us who he is. And one of the things that we talked about, I think last time, or the time before, from whom or from what has God promised to save? From the Romans? No, but what? The unholy triumvirate. Sin, death, and the devil. So what does the angel say? You will call his name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins, not the oppressive Romans. All right? He will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophet. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel. Now, that passage is a quote from Isaiah chapter 7, starting at verse 14. Here's the context for Isaiah. Ahaz is the Jewish king. And Ahaz and the city of Jerusalem are under threat. The king of Israel, this is after the 12 tribes have divided, and Judah is separate from Israel. And the northern 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, have come against Jerusalem and laid siege to the city. All right, so the boys are fighting. And Ahaz is troubled, and Isaiah comes to him and says, ask a sign of the Lord, will you and the city be saved or captured? And Ahaz, who is not a very good king, Ahaz says, I don't want to trouble God. Well, does he not want to trouble God, or does he not want to get bad news? You know, if he never asks, he can live with whatever illusion he's got, you know, and he's got, does this sound familiar? He's got paid staff who are telling him exactly what he wants to hear. right? So as long as his ear is filled with that, why would he want to listen to anybody else, right? Sound familiar? Well, Isaiah says, you're not going to ask, I'm going to tell you. There is a young woman, in the Hebrew the word is not virgin, there is a young woman who's pregnant. And she will give birth to a son and name him Emmanuel. And before the boy is old enough, it doesn't say to walk, but or before he's very old, the siege will be lifted. And Jerusalem will be safe. So the king doesn't want a sign, but Isaiah still gives him a sign. One question is, when Matthew quotes Isaiah 7, verse 14, does it have the same meaning for the birth of Jesus as it did when it was originally written? Do you know what I mean? Can a Bible passage have more than one meaning, depending upon when it's read and who reads it? Well, in Isaiah, it's all about a siege and a king who doesn't trust God. God gives him a sign anyway. There's a young woman who's pregnant. When she gives birth to a baby boy, she's going to name him Emmanuel before that boy can walk, let's say, or before he's weaned. The siege will be lifted, intended to set the king at ease and hopefully turn the king, instead of doing what he wants, to doing what he's supposed to do according to God's purpose for the king. He doesn't care. But when Matthew is telling the story of Jesus and what the angel said to Joseph, the same Bible verse comes up. Now, not about a siege, but about this incredibly unbelievable birth. Your girlfriend, your fiance is pregnant. You know, and I know, the baby's not yours. But there is this prophecy. A virgin in the New Testament, will conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. So Jesus, whose name means literally God saves, it also turns out is Emmanuel, God with us. And I think, I can't remember. I love teaching 2 Bible studies every week because I love to teach, but I can't keep straight what I said on Tuesday and what I say on Sunday. So if you're thinking, well, huh? Yeah.
Exactly.
But if you're thinking, well, we didn't hear that on Tuesday, just figure, All right, so what we say is that Jesus is the fulfillment of this prophecy that was fulfilled already in the Old Testament. A young woman gave birth to a son when the city was under siege. She called him Emmanuel, and the siege was lifted. Okay? And then centuries later, this same prophecy is fulfilled when a young virgin engaged to a man named Joseph gives birth to a son who's not Joseph's, but God's own. And we talk about fulfillment. One of the things I learned from Roy Arisville was to think about what words mean. What does fulfillment mean? It means to fill that Old Testament prophecy, fill it full of new meaning. All right? So it's not necessarily he checked all the boxes, but he filled what was said then full of new meaning. All right? So the virgin conceived, gave birth to a son. They called him Jesus. And when Joseph names the boy, he legally adopts him. So Jesus is the son of David, well, because he's God's son, but also because he's adopted into that family tree. Okay? Does that make sense? When I was away at college, we came home one weekend and there's this huge German Shepherd living in our house. The house is no longer my house, I mean, because I'm at college. You know how that can be. You go away and, I mean, it didn't change the locks, but everything else in my bedroom changed. You know how that can be? Well, what's the first thing they do when they bring this stray dog, a beautiful German Shepherd, into the house? What are we going to call him?
Oh.
And when they name him, you know he's not going out the door again. You know he's there to stay. Got to buy him a collar. What name are we going to put on the collar? Clyde. Now, maybe Richard would know why Clyde. This was in the 1970s, and the New York Knickerbocker basketball team had a pair of wonderful guards, Earl the Pearl Monroe and Walt Clyde Frazier. So that's where Clyde, remember those days, Richard? That's where Clyde came from. You didn't dare put on a pair of gloves when Clyde was around because he thought you wanted to play. And he played rough with gloves. All right, so what kind of a king is this who is born of the Virgin Mary? He's no tourist, right? He doesn't helicopter in. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of water. And get back on the helicopter and go home. Okay? He comes to stay. I know how to saw a 2x4s. You tell me how many you want and how many, you know, and what length. Okay? Let's go to work. Right? He comes to stay. And he is an atypical king. Maybe you remember this if you've been see through the scriptures. He is a king on his knees. And he's a king, that means, who washes feet. Right? And I don't care if it's when Sylvia was running the homestead or today in the homestead. The people that wash feet are not the most highly paid. Right? I mean, they do. When I was at seminary, I heard that Lingwamston Nursing Home was hiring. I needed a job, so I went to Lingwamston, filled out the paperwork. It's a Lutheran-run home, not too far from Luther Seminary. Filled out the paperwork, and then the wife of a faculty member was the head of nursing there. She said, I want one of the other aides to show you around, give you an idea what the job involves. By the time I learned what the job involved, I said to the director of nursing, I can't do that. Emptying bedpans, helping with baths. I mean, maybe I could help my grandpa, but I'm not going to do that 16 hours every weekend. And for $5 an hour at that point, you know, back in the 70s. Well, but, I mean, somebody does it. I mean, I watched it with my dad, day in and day out. You know, well, this is the kind of king we have, not one who just orders people around. Give me a drink! You know, but one who washes feet. Okay? So, that's from the very beginning in the Gospel of Matthew. Thoughts, comments, questions, insights. Sylvia.
And maybe, you know,
do with this, but the emotional state of those two people, that young woman and that man, at that time, were they real familiar with the prophecies of old? Did they know about all these prophecies that, you know, they could know it was there when it was told to them, and then it was like, oh, wow, that's us they're talking about. But, you know, I mean, I just can't imagine what they.
I think that's the fairest thing to say. Who can imagine? Because, let me ask you this, how many confirmed Lutherans do we have in this room? Okay. Did you have to look at the end of the worship service today to see the Fifth Commandment and its meaning, or could you just recite it? Huh? You looked, okay? So, just think for a moment. Here you got Joseph, who probably was bar mitzvahed. Okay, so he was confirmed. Okay, but we don't know how old he was. You know, I mean, we know he wasn't as old as, maybe as old as Sig, maybe a little older. You know, but much younger than the rest of us. How much did he remember from his bar mitzvah? And it's for sure that at his bar mitzvah, there wouldn't have been two Friday nights where they'd have studied about Old Testament prophecy, so when the angel appeared, he'd say, oh yeah, that's what the rabbi was talking about. I mean, this I think one of the most important things for us to learn is that faith is never God's trigger. Our faith never prompts God to do what God's going to do. Our faith is a response to what God is doing. You know what I mean? So it's not like God's, that girl's bright enough, if she gets pregnant, she'll know exactly what's going on. You gotta be kidding, you know. So, the whole Bible is filled with people reacting to this mystery or catastrophe. I mean, Mary might have planned to go to school, you know, and all of a sudden, she's pregnant. How long did she keep that hidden?
Well, till she went to Elizabeth.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, after 6 weeks when she, you know,
Probably.
thought something was happening, did she, you know, mom's making coffee one morning and she says, I got a surprise. You know, or I mean, if you think about that,
Yeah,
huh?
how it happened.
And I don't have a clue how it happened. Yeah, right. That's even better, right? So, I mean, you know, I think that's an important question for us to ponder, and it's interesting. I'm starting to think about Advent, and then. I mean, Amy made that announcement this morning, and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I know the stores are getting ready for Christmas, but are we too? You know, buy your flowers now or buy your wreath now. Well, I mean, I understand why that has to be, but I'm thinking about Advent and Christmas, and I'm thinking I might preach Christmas Eve on, did Mary really have reason to ponder? Because that's what it says. The shepherds showed up, we saw angels, here's what they said, and it says Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. She spent a lot of time pondering. Right? In between washing dirty diapers and, you know, putting them back on the baby. You know, oh my gosh.
How about the rest of the populace?
What do you mean, Carrie?
You know, you must have known she was pregnant, she wasn't married. You know, so. It doesn't mention.
So I read a sermon once where the preacher says, what do you think they called Jesus on the playground?
Bastard. So people did know it.
Why, sure. You know, I mean, that's it's not the greatest beginning,
Yeah.
you know. But we know your mom and dad weren't married. Or got married, you know.
I heard when this week now, this little girl had it all planned out. She's, when she was 13, she's gonna experiment. And boy, I said, so my granddaughter, great granddaughter, you get a hold of that girl and you tell her, just look around and all the trouble that these kids are having. You know, where's your dad? Where's your dad do? Well, and they all try to say, you know, and that is some drugs and this and that. It's more than that. You get into a lot more serious things than drugs. And another thing is, there isn't that family thing anymore. It seems like girls are usually taking care of their own babies, and dad comes around once in a while. There isn't that coming home from school and having supper and how was your day today?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's gone.
yeah, in a lot of homes.
A lot of homes is gone.
When I was at seminary, you have to take 2 classes in pastoral care. One, you have to go to a hospital once a week for 10 weeks and learn how to walk in and out of a hospital without making a complete fool of yourself. You know, I mean, you gotta start somewhere. And then the other 10 weeks, I was assigned with 3 of my classmates, and I've told this before, so forgive me if you know, I mean, I know I've told this before. We were assigned to Lutheran Social Service down on Park, I think, in Minneapolis. And they had, Monday nights, they had meetings and groups for young girls who were pregnant. And I was in the group. There would be an hour presentation on baby care or a family budget or, I mean, all these, how to find an apartment, all these things that they were gonna have to do. And a lot of them without much help, except Lutheran Social Service. And then we'd have some kind of a snack, and then we'd break into groups. And I was with the 12, 13, and 14-year-olds who were pregnant. And then there was 15 and 16 and 17 and older. And we didn't, thankfully, we didn't run the group, but they had a professional on the staff, social worker on the staff at Lutheran Social Service. And I remember one night in particular, she asked, why did you get pregnant? Because for most of the girls it was a choice. And one little girl said, I really didn't want to, and in fact, when I would try and sneak out at night, I would make as much noise as possible, hoping that my parents would get up and say, where are you going? You can't go. I mean, that's sad. Well, why are you having a baby? Because I want somebody to love me. And I mean, I wasn't married at the time, but I mean, I've got a brother who's 10 years younger than I am. And I remember when he came home from the hospital, he did not do any loving. Right? You don't have a baby so that somebody will love you, and especially right off the bat.
It's reverse, yeah.
You know, and my gosh, I mean, it was just so sad. But Mark, you know, some of that same kind of stuff that you're talking about, you know, and often the father not around. So, very tough. You know, it makes me appreciate the most dreaded question when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old was, what'd you do in school today? Right? I don't want to answer that question. Nothing. What'd you learn? Nothing. You know. Ever tell you that story? So, one day in the summer, my dad comes home. No school. What'd you learn today? Nothing, it's summer. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking. You don't say that, because it's your dad, you know, and he's got hands, you know, that can find a nail. You know, so, nothing. Well, don't you think you ought to learn something every day? If you'd have learned something today, I'd have given you a nickel. So, the next day, I'm up early. And do you remember Golden Book encyclopedias?
Yes.
Well, we had a set of Golden Book encyclopedias, and I read like 3 volumes. And you think she's got a lot of pages in this report, I got pages of stuff I've learned. Guess what happened? I mean, I already got the $20 spent, you know? And he never asked, aren't you gonna ask what I learned today? Oh my gosh.
Oh dear.
Terrible. Just think of all that time I wasted reading the Golden Book Encyclopedia.
Did he ever ask it again?
Not when it counted. Or I should say, not when it paid.
Oh, he paid, yeah.
So, all right, so next time, in Matthew chapter 2, we don't have other speakers next week, so we'll get into Matthew chapter 2, which is the story of the so-called wise men. And then we'll move on from there in the Gospel of Matthew. And then I'll mention today, on the 23rd of this month, Kent Eklund will be here to talk about the election, or elections. And we happened to see Kent and Catherine at a concert Friday night, and I shook his hand, I said, we'll see you on the 23rd. He says, I haven't written any notes yet, because I'm waiting for the election to settle down. And that was before, you know, the worst that's come out lately. So I said to him, so in other words, there will be no notes when you come. But anyway, Kent is coming on the 23rd, and it should be interesting. Maybe more interesting this time than ever before.
But I hit the mute button at home the minute any of that comes on TV. I can't bother listening
I
now.
don't blame you.
It's ridiculous.
Why does it say here that Joseph divorced Mary?
Divorced Mary? Because apparently in that day and age, in that culture, an engagement was as solid, supposed to be as solid as a marriage. And in fact, Myrna, when we talked about this in a New Testament class at Luther Seminary, Harrisville told us that, now I was there from 75 to 79, but in the 50s and 60s and before, if you were a seminary student and engaged, and you broke the engagement, or the engagement was broken, you were immediately placed on probation, because they wondered what's wrong. Because it was considered, I mean, an engagement was considered that strong a commitment.
Yeah, they live next to us.
So, that's why the language divorce is used.